Welcome to the 2021 Fanfare Launch into Cyberspace. Normally, you'd be visiting the High School of Art and Design's gymnasium, cafeteria, and other spaces around the building to interact and learn about the incredible creations of our young professionals, other creators and innovators in the community. You'd be seeing portfolio reviews. You would be involved in special seminars and workshops. You'd be seeing exciting contests and draw-a-thons. Again, that would have been during a normal school year. The incredible challenges of the pandemic have forced our amazing PTA to take Fanfare and bring it online. So this is our first and hopefully only virtual Fanfare event. And with that said, we still have the vast majority of incredible experiences and learning opportunities for you to be a part of. We're incredibly proud of what our PTA and larger school community have put together and can't wait for you to join us throughout today and the next few days as each one offers unique and special events. Be safe, be well, most importantly, enjoy yourselves and be part of our community.
Hey guys, welcome to the last day of Fanfare New York City. We've got a great day of panels set up for you, which are only made possible by your donations. So if you can, please go to fanfarenyc.com to donate, or you can text FFNYC to 44-321. And now let me introduce your first panel. Landscape architecture is all around us. A walk through our neighborhoods reveals constructed natural beauty and the variety of cool and familiar places brought to you by landscape architecture. Join us as we discuss what landscape architecture is all about and how it crosses through various skill sets with our student moderators who are all senior architecture majors. We have Viviana, India, and Pablo. Take it away, guys.
Hello, I'm India Butler. As John was saying, I'm a senior in architecture, and I'm really happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Pablo Green. Likewise, I am senior architecture, and if not more, happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Viviana Latore. I'm one of your moderators. As the rest have said, I'm a senior architecture. I'm happy to be here as well. So today we have two landscape architects joining our panel today. One of them is Tae-Wook Cha of Supermass Studios and Adrian Hayes of the New York City Parks Department.
Good morning, everyone. So we're here to talk about what is landscape architecture. Thank you for the introduction, by the way, everyone. I'm Adrian from New York City Parks, and we're going to take a brief look in just a moment. Well, let me let Tae-Wook introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone. This is Tae-Wook Cha. I'm a landscape architect and also a principal and founder of Supermass Studio. We are a landscape architecture design company based in New York City. I've given many talks and presentations, but this is the first time that I'm talking to high school students. So I'm very excited about this. And thank you very much for including us in this really cool event.
All right.
So that was a great introductory video prepared by American Society of Landscape Architects. But what about the landscapes around us? Adrian, do you mind walking us through a more familiar landscape around our own city?
Absolutely. We're going to take a look at some landscapes that might be familiar to you at a variety of scales, sort of reinforce that landscape really encompasses more than you might have originally thought. So what does it look like? It looks like all of these things, from big to small, from residential to commercial and beyond, waterfronts, as you saw in the video. So you can really see that there is a lot captured in landscape architecture. So we're going to look at a snapshot of a variety of scales. First, at the extra large scale, we have Fresh Kills Park in Staten Island by James Corner Field Operations. And this is formerly the largest landfill in the world and transformed into one of the largest parks. It's roughly three times the size of Central Park, as you can see in that scale map. And it's a complete transformation. And of course, we couldn't get away with not mentioning Central Park for iconic green spaces in the city. It's 843 acres, and everybody knows this place. And this is sort of source material, a touchstone for a lot of landscape architects when we start the conversation about landscape architecture. Then you have other areas like Brooklyn Bridge Park at the large scale, reclaimed abandoned areas that have been transformed, formerly industrial sites, which are something that landscape architects deal with a lot, into a variety of programmed public space all along the waterfront edge. And similarly, the High Line, a very well-known landscape, also by James Corner Field Operations, sort of winds its way through Chelsea, a former meatpacking line, and makes good use of former industrial infrastructure to create this very interesting perspective on the city that you wouldn't otherwise get. Pier 26, also a pier along the waterfront at a smaller scale, sort of medium scale, program packed nonetheless, and also a unique combination of recreation and ecological aquatic habitat at this park. Blending those things is a very common trick that landscape architects are asked to do, in blending these various things together. And of course, the more commonly understood realm of landscape architecture is typically the residential landscape, where people live, or the landscape associated with buildings that people live in and interact with every day. And then down to the very small, the extra small, where we have this whimsical intervention called Parking Day, which some of you may know, where parking spaces were transformed into mini green spaces. And it all started with people paying the meter for the 2 hours and taking over that parking space as sort of a disruptive activist project to change people's thinking about what is park space, what is urban space, and what should be park space. So, Taewok, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Adrian. That was a great overview of more familiar spaces around New York City and what landscape architecture does. So to do all these great projects, how do we actually work? I want to walk you through kind of the steps and processes landscape architecture typically takes to create these landscapes and projects. All projects of landscape architecture typically start with this site visit. And site visit is extremely important in landscape architecture because the site is the landscape. And oftentimes we start with all of our collaborators, clients. Here you see on the left, our client Julie at the city of Kingston, who was our client for this Kingston climate change project. Our engineering collaborator Eric, and a bunch of other people from New York State, DC, and from our own office. And after the site visit, as architecture student, you may be familiar with the idea of design charrette. We go back to the office, sit together, and just talk away, sketch out, brainstorm, throwing out a lot of ideas. It's called design charrette. It's where you start and throwing out your initial ideas, impressions that eventually become your design ideas. And then we go out to the community. The public engagement is becoming increasingly important part of landscape architecture as well as any public projects. There are a number of different ways we do public engagement, like from the typical town hall type presentation, that's classic way of public engagement. But we also go out to the community, to their the festivals, events, to do show and tell type of public engagement. I once took the entire community out at night times for the Nighting event to have the community experience the nighttime lighting landscape. So that was unique, all the way to the more remote public engagement through webinars. That's something similar to what we're doing now during the quarantine period last year. Then we start our conceptualization or actual design phase. And believe it or not, even in the time of this digital technology, landscape architects still draw by hand. That's an important part of the initial thought process. And then we use ideas like these, the use of the diagrams to convey and communicate the kind of initial ideas to our clients. The use of model and 3D technology is equally important during the conceptualization. Here you can see the very preliminary study model of the topography, or very preliminary or even crude 3D the rendering model, and how they eventually become the final finished design product at the bottom. Sometimes we actually combine those 3D physical models with digital technology and bring the model directly into our 3D programs and develop the final design. And of course, as you develop your design, the physical model study is always important, very helpful to understand the entire kind of scale and spatial quality of the process. And here, my own little son at the time was examining the physical model as a future client. And then we also supplement those physical model study with more developed 3D visualization study using various 3D computer graphics tools to test out the actual three-dimensional experience in the space. And then you go into the more technical phase, construction documentation, to make your design constructable, buildable. At this stage, there will be a variety of problems, issues you may not encounter or anticipate during the design process. So a lot of these phases is about problem solving to make things more realistic. And then you go into construction. Landscape architects don't build the project. That's the job of the contractors. But landscape architect stays throughout the construction to make sure every construction process going smoothly, make sure all of our design intent are adhered during this construction process. And that's called, that's the job of construction administration. And during this construction phase, there will be numerous construction meetings on the site. Here, my client Doso in Newark, grilling about, hey, is this really going to work? Are you sure it's going to work? And I am assuring him, don't worry, it's going to work out. Everything's fine. You have to go through a number of these meetings on the site until the opening day. And then, of course, the opening day is the best day of the landscape architecture process. This is the Mulberry Commons Park in Newark. On the opening day, these children, looking at these children swarming into this play area was the best thing that you can ask for. And on the opening day, when everyone enjoy the park, you feel really good about it, and you can stand tall. So that's kind of the snapshot or overview of the steps that we take to create these landscape as a landscape architect. But then what about our own project? We'd like to kind of walk you through the examples of the actual projects we did through our own practice, and give you a better understanding of what landscape architecture is and what landscape architects do. So Adrian, do you want to start with your own projects here?
Absolutely. And I'm going to sort of dovetail in with the process that you looked at and look at what that means for a parks project, focusing on this park, Almeida Playground, that just recently opened in Rockaway. So we're in Arvern neighborhood in Rockaway around Beach 60s. And as Tewok said, a big part of public projects especially is this community engagement process. So we go and we meet typically in a public space like a cafeteria at a school or a community center. The community is engaged and we ask them, what do you want? And it's listening mostly, but also a little bit of education about what we can do, what we can provide based on the constraints of the place, the site, and the budget that we have. So from that, we develop the goals of the project and figure out what we can really give them. We look at, like I said, the budget that we're given. Usually that comes in parks. Our funding source is the mayor or council members or the borough president. All those elected officials have pots of money that they can put towards parks. And so we gather that together. Once we have that, we look at our context and say, where are we? What's around us? What is needed in this site that's not provided? And what's close that we don't want to be redundant, but sometimes people feel strongly about certain things they want and we give it to them. So once we do that, we also go a little bit deeper and we look at the site context from an ecological standpoint, environmental standpoint, and figure out what are the constraints that we have to work with in that regard. This is in Rockaway, so obviously one of the things to be aware of is flooding. And that's something that we consider in all our projects. How relationship to water and flooding is always very primary in the initial stages in the investigation. So from there, we develop diagrams and studies and look at the existing conditions and what we have. This was the existing condition of Almeida. So as you can see, it was a park that could use a little bit of love and attention. So moving from there into the conceptual phase, where at the bottom left, you have what is called a partie, which is sort of the germ of the idea that eventually makes its way into something more fully realized in a form and shape. And that can be developed a number of ways based on circulation patterns or constraints, existing trees or conditions or things that sort of make you make choices to fit things in the best possible way. And so that then turned into this design. It's a K through 8 school that uses this as their playground, their play yard, but also there's a portion of the park that's open to the community at any time. So you can see it's sort of does double duty in that way. And here were the renderings. We made a nice open, welcoming entrance to the street where before it was sort of off to the side, and some exciting new play equipment. There's a sort of wave and ocean theme sort of abstracted that you'll see in the next slide, especially in the spray shower. We took that wave theme and carried it from the ground plane up the surface of a handball wall where you see that tile mosaic. And so this was the vision, and you know, it looks pretty close. This one, the ribbon was cut last week, and like Tewok said, when you get out there and you get your shovel in the ground, stand next to the commissioner and see what you did, feels good. You remember why you do it. Here's another example. I'm going to walk through a couple more just quickly. This is Travers Park, which is another park playground type of space. But the reason this is noteworthy is that this is a real community hub, this park. It's one of the most densely populated neighborhoods in the city, Jackson Heights, and they're very starved for green space. So one of the big asks there was that big sort of gumdrop lawn you see in the bottom, as well as we had an opportunity to add on spaces to this park. As you see in the center, there's a street that is no longer a street for cars. It's a pedestrian zone. And so taking that existing park space and weaving it together with both the street and a new parcel across the street next to that circle there in the center was the challenge of this design. And here we have a nice central plaza space in the street that's programmed with music and activities and is just a great flexible open space. And then the lawn area that people love to come and enjoy was again a huge request from the community. Nothing like that really existed in the area, so we carried that closely, and parks especially has to look very closely at maintenance, because as a public entity, we have to be careful about how we use our resources. But we were able to propose this and carry it all the way through. And we went from that image you see in the top left with a lot of pavement and very tall fences to this really welcoming, open, rolling green landscape that you see now. So those are the renderings. Here's what it looks like. And as you can see, it's very well used, very popular spot. This is one that's just finishing design now and going out in park on East River in Long Island City, next to the Costco. And here was a chance, speaking of using constraints and dealing with constraints, the topography in the site is pretty pronounced. And so a way to use that in our play experience was we basically allowed the topography to create an accessible experience through the play equipment, allowing the slopes to bring people up to a higher level and move through and create an inclusive experience for everyone who wants to play on this playground. And then the lawn area, passive open space that's really popular for picnicking and just hanging out and enjoying the views. There's great views at this park. So that's a little taste of what we do and what I do at parks. And now I want to hand it over to Taewook so that he can show us a slightly different face of landscape architecture through his work.
Thank you, Adrian. That was a really impressive collection of work. It's really nice to see the walkthrough of these projects in real life. As you can see, a lot of Adrian's project, being a Parks Department project, focuses heavily on community, and that is a great thing. As a private sector office, we also focus a lot on these private projects, but we also covers various other wider range of projects from commercial projects, residential projects, waterfronts, all the way to urban design. So I want to give you some kind of a flair of what landscape architecture also do in other areas of the practice. So this is a more very common park in Newark, New Jersey. It's a downtown park in the middle of the city. It's probably what you would expect from a really nice park. Beautiful trees, plaza, seatings, beautiful grasses and plants, all good. We also design a very interesting playscape that's part of the program. So here our goal was creating a playscape that doesn't necessarily look like typical playground. So the play structure was very sculptural. The typical program like slide we installed, it's not the typical width, it's a super wide slide, and that instantly changes your perception of playscape and makes you feel, oh, this is something different, but equally fun, or maybe more fun. At night, we have this arena plaza with interactive fountains with the lightings, the beautiful background of the New York City skyline. And it's really important because this shows the relationship between landscape architecture and the city. We always emphasize the landscape and the city are not two opposite sides. They're in complementary relationship. The landscape cannot exist without the city and vice versa. On a more smaller scale, this is also in Newark, Rutgers University HLLC dormitory project. It was for a courtyard for a dormitory. But here I want to show what landscape architects do beyond their typical boundary. Of course, we planted trees, we designed a courtyard, but what we also did was the improvement on the facade of the concrete parking garage here. So we employed the technique of super graphic signage mounting. And we took the 4 keywords of the project: owners, living, and learning community. We translated them into number of languages that are most commonly spoken on the community or in the campus. And this is how it was actually implemented during the last leg of the construction. So this represents the the idea of diversity and cultural, the richness of the campus through these super graphic treatment. And also, although this is in a courtyard project, the relationship or experience you have from within the building is equally important to the experience you're having outside on the courtyard. On a very different scale, this is the competition project we did in Seoul, South Korea for Seoul International District Waterfront. Here, we took a big chunk of the city district and designed the entire waterfront that surround that city district. It's called International District. A lot of these design principles here are based on how we cope with the climate change and sea level rise and restore the ecological habitats in a dense city. So here, programs like these, the wetland interpretive areas along the new stream side or river side is an important part of this project. But of course, how the city meets the landscape, the river's edge was equally important. So here you can see it. This is also a very urban project, and the connecting the city to the river and the landscape has the equal focus during this process. Closer to home, on a similar theme of climate changes, coping with sea level rise, this Kingston Point Climate Adaptive Design in Kingston, New York, right along the Hudson River, was dealing with the issue of rising sea level. As you can see in this diagram, from 2000, well, present day to the middle 2050 and 2080, you can see the Kingston Point will be inundated with the rising water level. So we designed these terraced beaches. There's a very popular public beach in Kingston Point, which was going to be flooded in the next 30, 60 years. We designed this terraced beach to take the flooding as the sea level rises, but at the same time maintains the popular activities on the beach. And we use diagrams like this to kind of communicate that design ideas. You can see on the right how the changing sea level rise from 2020 all the way through 2080 manage it and still preserve the popular activities on the beach. And sections like this, you can clearly see how these terraced beach landscape work with rising sea level over time. On a really large scale, landscape architects also deal with the entire city making. This was the New Town Urban Design in Goyang, South Korea. We are collaborating with architects and engineers to build the entire city. And as a landscape architect, we designed the entire open space green network system in the city and this streamside park that runs through the city in the middle. And you can see how these streamside park as a centerpiece functions as the ecological and sustainable feature to process the stormwater, the rainwater flooding, to protect the city from the flooding during the heavy rainy season. This is probably a more typical landscape architect's project, residential rooftop garden for multifamily housing. This is the residential rooftop in East Orange in New Jersey. This is the recent completion. This is how we started as during the design process. You can see how these ideas translate into the real life landscape throughout the process. In terms of extra small project, landscape architect can also do really small things like these art installation. This was the called it swing tones, combination of tree swings and metal chimes installation we did in New Hampshire forest during a 3-week sleepaway youth camp. This is how it's built. These children actually built the project during their 3-week summer camp program. And they're testing out on their final day the built project. So as you rock the swing back and forth, the chime connected to the swing gets activated, create this really beautiful orchestral sound in the forest. And you can see these kids are trying out the project they built in the landscape and having the time of their lifetime. I want to conclude with this LaGuardia Airport Terminal B project we recently completed. It's actually still ongoing for the phase 2 of the project. When you go to a place like airport, you may not think of landscape architecture. You are inside, you're surrounded by this majestic architecture infrastructure, But there are always something that are related to landscape. In this case, we designed this central concourse park, an interior park in the concourse. And this would be the first thing that will greet all the travelers before they're getting into their gate. So here our focus was creating a real piece, or what feels like a real piece of nature, something that you would expect from a typical New York City public park that our city is known for. So once you get here, you don't feel like you're in a shopping mall or a cosmetic landscape. You feel like for a moment, you're actually stepping into a real landscape, a real park. And this detail you see here, everything you see in this image is done by a landscape architect. From the flooring pattern in the floor of the tiles, what looks like an architectural precast concrete seatings, the metal benches, all the way to the plantings on top of these benches. So this is a kind of, that shows the range of things that landscape architects do in a very kind of detailed scale, from the floors, seatings, furnishings, and of course, planting. And this shows how we actually accomplish those interesting looking benches. So we utilize these digitally generated computer graphics technique. So we modeled all of these pieces in computer. We send them directly to the fabricator, and all those benches are actually generated straight out of our 3D model. So it's really interesting. So next time you go to the fly out of the Laguardia Airport Terminal B, you will have to pass through this interior part. And when you do, think about what landscape architect did to create this beautiful landscape, and maybe you want to become one day as well. So this is a snapshot of what landscape architecture do, what landscape architecture is. With that, I would like to open the floor to question and answers and some interesting discussions.
Okay, so I'll go first. The first question we have is, what started your interest in the profession, and how did it lead to where you are now?
Tewak, I'll start off on that one, give you a break for a second. So there's many ways that people arrive to the field, and trainings that people start out with to get there. Sometimes people know that they want to do this and they go undergraduate landscape architecture and they get educated that way, or some related field. Sometimes, if you're like me, you do something unrelated and then you find it later. I sort of didn't know about landscape architecture and got an English major for my undergraduate degree, and was working in various other unrelated fields. I did some construction, I built houses, and I did food service and all kinds of things actually. And then sort of found it from a suggestion, researched it, looked into it, got an internship at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center in Texas. And from there really like caught the bug. Like it was pretty quick after I learned about it and got my feet wet in it that I realized it was something that was right for me. It was just the right blend of pragmatic and creative, and it just brought together so many different strains of things that I was already interested in. So it's a great fit for me, and that's how I came to it.
That's really great, Adrian. These origin stories are always really interesting to me. For me, I grew up in Seoul, South Korea. It's a big, dense urban metropolis. But when I grew up, we always had a garden. My mom was an avid gardener. So I think that conditioned me to have the affinity to landscape. But I didn't know what landscape architecture was back then, just like you are, Adrian, in his first days. Didn't even know it was a real profession. So gardening was for hobby, not for real job. So I went to study horticulture in college, to study plant science. And that's what serious people do. Then one day, I think it was my sophomore year, I stumbled onto a piece of landscape architecture magazine from American Society of Landscape Architects in my science library at college. And that completely changed my life. I was like, this is landscape architecture. Like, it was beautiful, big, filled with happy people. And best of all, it was relatable. They were parks, plazas, and gardens. The places I could see myself in. And when you look at the images of good landscape architecture project, you can easily see yourself in them. Throwing a picnic blanket, sitting at a bench, or chatting with your friends. It's very approachable. I think that's why I was drawn into the landscape architecture.
That's great.
Yeah, it sounds really nice. So second question is, I mean, you kind of touched base on it, but on your presentation, what are the key differences between architecture and landscape architecture?
You want to start, Adrian? It's a very contentious question.
We had a good discussion about this when we were getting ready for this. There's a lot of things. I think that at its most basic, the quick answer is that architects deal a lot more with objects and materiality and details, buildings and structures, and landscape architects really bring together a lot of various elements, and the lines are sort of blurry on what we do. And some people say landscape architecture is everything under the sky, and that's a lot. There's a lot of various things that we have to consider. And Taewok was talking about, the people, excited, happy people in the space. That's really the lifeblood of what we're doing too. Like living organisms, plants, people, and bringing those living systems together in a connected way. Materials and objects are part of that. They have to be, but it's all in the service of the occupying the space.
So I just want to add my 2 cents on the aspect of people, because the people are really critical part of landscape architecture. And I know there can be a disagreement here, so I'm going to tread lightly, but I think in architecture, a lot of time you complete the building and people go into the building. A building can be self-completing, like a piece of art. In landscape architecture, people go into the landscape to complete the landscape. There's a key difference here. So oftentimes the landscape architecture is not as articulate or tectonically complex as architecture. It's much looser. But it's the people that fill in that loose space and complete the landscape. So in my opinion, any landscape without people is incomplete.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd like to just add, there's a term that gets used in landscape architecture a lot, and natural systems, and that's kind of what we bring in and through what we do, and what really makes it exciting and different,
So a bit of a add-on to that, right? So because of the variety of landscape architecture, do you think you work with different types of people more than, say, average architects? Like getting people from the community to talk into, and maybe even asking horticulturalists to see what type of plants are best for the area, something like that. So do you think that's true?
Well, I think that is absolutely true, in my opinion. Mostly because if you think about a building and a park, how many people will be in a building on a given day compared to a place like Central Park? A good building will have, say, 300 people working in there. You go to Central Park, you see thousands of people at any given day. And when you look at their faces, they're all very happy. I think that's the key to the landscape architect, and also why we're doing it, because we make, or not we, but the landscape we create make people happy. But that also means we have to actually consider all those different types of people who come to this park. There are much larger audience to cater to in landscape architecture. That's why we also go a lot more to the community meeting through public engagement. Architects do the similar thing, but I think the range of the community that we have to reach out to is much broader. And also the range of the collaboration we typically do for landscape architecture project is much wider than architecture, who is focused more on very definite buildings.
Okay, so my last question is, so what are the challenges of being a landscape architect, and you know, some of the problems you face, and maybe what turns people away from the profession?
Well, so I'm going to give a sort of coy answer first, which is that challenges make good landscape architecture, and that, you know, what you do with the constraints you're given is the magic, you know, of taking something that's difficult and making something good. But, you know, a more grounded answer is that it can be a lot of hard work, and it's also sometimes non-linear, even though we've given you a snapshot of, you know, the typical process that a job will go through. Whatever the scale of the project is, it sort of has a similar flow in terms of the building blocks, but it isn't really like that day to day usually. There's a lot of back and forth and stopping and starting and roadblocks and, you know, stumbling blocks and things that you have to deal with. And that process can be difficult for some people to manage because sometimes you don't know what to expect. I don't know, Taewok, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that's absolutely true in a very kind of detailed manner, but I think at the bottom of all those, the underlying challenge that we face every day as a landscape architect is not many people know exactly what landscape architect does or what landscape architecture is. Like my mom, for instance, right?
Just like we used to be.
That's right. Well, that's also why we decided to give a talk to this forum to educate future aspiring landscape architects.
Exactly.
But take my mom, for example, like, who was an avid gardener. She still thinks she knows more about gardening. After I finished my Harvard education, have my own practice building airports and waterfronts and parks, she still thinks she knows more. And she's probably right. I'm not pretending I'm a master gardener. But there are a lot more than gardening in landscape architecture. And I think that's the part a lot of people overlook. Landscape architects contribute much broader aspects of our lives than most people imagine. So providing green space for relaxation, of course, but in city making, creating sustainable environment, preparing our cities and waterfronts for climate change and sea level rise. These are all what's in landscape architect's plate these days, and increasingly more so.
Good answer.
Okay, just to add on to Pablo's question here, since you said that there are many roadblocks every day, maybe not, you know, there's a lot of unexpected moments. Is there such a thing as a typical day at work, or is it just too different to tell? And if there is a typical day, can you take us through it?
Sure, Taewok, I'll start, and because it really varies as to where you are in the project. That's one answer. You know, what stage you are, what phase you are working through at the time can dictate what you're doing. So at the front end, especially when the project is brand new and you don't have a design, you're doing a lot of investigation, which is, in my case at Parks, involves, you know, mobilizing other disciplines, people who can, you know, they do survey, we take borings, we check and see if the soil quality is good and what needs to be done, if anything, to the soil, the bearing capacity of the soil through borings that are taken, the ecological and physical constraints of the site. So you gather all those things together, and that usually is a lot of gathering materials that exist, like maps. You can do mapping and diagrams. You send a lot of emails to request people to help you. Sort of administrative things like that. And then you can move into that charrette design phase, conceptual phase that starts to make it real. And that's, you're drawing by hand, you're looking at inspiration from other things that have been done, you know, looking at precedents that can spark something in you that relate to what you're doing. You can do research about materials that maybe you're interested in using, and that can move you in a direction. But as you can see, there's really not one way to crack that nut. And so that means that you have to end up thinking creatively and try to be novel in your approach. It's really new every time, even if you're doing the same kind of space, the same kind of landscape architecture, it's new every time because you come at it from a new perspective, and you kind of want to, you want to bring something new to each project and keep refining your process. And, that anyway, so that's the conceptual, and then it moves forward into the construction documents phase, which is you're drafting, you're using AutoCAD to create a document set that you can then hand over to the contractor, or in our case at Parks, put into the bidding process for a contractor to bid on, and then out into the field for construction administration, which in Parks is, we have a variety of people working for us that we manage that do that, but making sure everything goes in. If your drawings were good and your notes were good, you get to go out and confirm all that. So it's more often than not, you're working at the computer and making these things come to life, but in various modes, and then splitting your time between the site at certain phases of the project. That's my answer for that. Taewik, what do you think?
No, I think that's absolutely great. So Adrian covers, in a lot of detail what landscape architects do day to day from their desk on the field, talking to the consultants and other engineers. But one thing kind of struck me in your explanation, that's about thinking creativity. And I think that's what defines our typical day in a lot of ways. And that's also what makes it challenging and rewarding. Your typical day varies a lot because we're in a creative business. It's difficult because you cannot plan creativity. If you're on a typical office, you know what you do every day, next step, you just follow the step, you complete your work. When you have to create something, you cannot force your creativity to come out. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. So there are days when you sit down with your pencil or in your computer, ideas just start flowing, and you got excited and just punching over your keyboard, your colored pencil. In a few hours, you come up with these great design ideas. Other days, you get stuck on your chair and you kind of pull out your hair, idea doesn't come out, you stay until 8, it becomes 10, 11, midnight. Adrian, you have a lot of those days too, right?
Yes, banging your head against the wall. I'm not a designer, I don't know how to do this.
Right, so there are days that go smoothly, then there are days that you're stuck. And I think that's all part of being a landscape architect. Probably similar to being an architect as well, but anyone in a creative business. So that's what defines or determines your typical day, smooth day, difficult day. But then another thing I want to talk about is even when it doesn't go smoothly, designing is a lot of fun. It's the kind of thing that you love, you enjoy doing it. But that's actually not everything about being a landscape architect or working in a real office. There are other things that not as fun, things like after your site visit, filling out your expense report, sending out invoice to your client. A lot of times your design fee doesn't come back in time. You have to write email, calling your client. When do I get my payment? And those things are not necessarily fun things, but those kind of menial things, boring things, not so fun things are also an equally important part of doing your practice. So when you see it as a holistic practice, there are fun things, there are technical things, there are more like office-like things. It's important to understand as holistic together. Once you understand those two different sides, you become a more balanced landscape architect.
Definitely. That's a great insight. And one thing I think I want to just add on to that is that the common thread through all of that, even the boring stuff, quote unquote, is communication. The best landscape architects are great communicators. And whether that means you're organizing a team and getting the work that you need from them, or getting the payment that you need from the client, or communicating your ideas graphically and visually and simply, that's communication is really at the heart of all of those things, and a great communicator will do well in landscape architecture. It really requires that.
So what I'm getting from both of your answers is that you do so many things during a project or the scope of a project. So such as communication, you design. So you're wearing many hats, kind of. So as your title is a landscape architect, but in that job, how many jobs do you really have? Like, do you find yourself doing things that are just completely out of your job description, things that they didn't really plan you for in college and stuff like that?
Oh, too many. Like, Adrian, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, it's everything from becoming an expert on the kind of material or lumber that will suit your project, or the way that different metals react in a saltwater environment, materiality, things like that you can get deep into, which they definitely don't teach you. I mean, it's, you encounter situations, and then you kind of like find the answer that you want, and then work back from that, figure out how do you get to the answer, like the design that you've shown, how do you get to that answer? And there's a lot of research and study and inquiry that can go into that. And what else? Like learning about, I don't know, eutrophic conditions in ponds where fish can't live because of excess, nitrogen content and runoff, and like very, science heavy biology things that really are a big factor in your design. Like what you're creating has to respond to those conditions. And again, like maybe you touched on those things in school, because we really are generalists in a lot of ways. So some studios have you investigating things that are very deep and scientific, and others are, theoretical and sort of in the sky. And that's another great thing about landscape architecture that I love, is that it's all of those things. It's the technical and the physical and the theoretical and the ethereal, and there's a little bit of magic sprinkled in there in between.
So I think that's absolutely right. You have to know and learn about a lot of different things. That's what landscape architecture covers. You don't have to know all about it, but just enough to know how to talk to those people, whether they are scientists, engineers, educators, community, architect, and so on. So I think that's the many hats that landscape architect has to wear. But I want to kind of share kind of my personal experience. It's, I always found kind of very rewarding. So when you go out to these meetings with other disciplines, you have to, well, first you have to design your landscape. You have to advocate what you design. That's the first role, or first hat you wear as a designer. But as a landscape architect, because it covers so many disciplines, we also have to play the role of coordinator or mediator between our collaborating architects or engineers, client, and community. And that's probably one of the core importance of the role that we play as a landscape architect. Like, there are often many disciplines involved to build a landscape. So from my kind of personal anecdote, the best compliment I received for the role that I played was when I was working on the Steeplechase Plaza in Coney Island. That was New York City Parks Department as a client. And when the project was completed, it involved many different people, engineers, architect, historic preservationists. We had to reach out to the community. And when the project was completed, I got compliments, like the usual compliments. Oh, you are a great designer, or a great leader, because I was a project manager, blah, blah, blah. But the best one I received, I still remember, was you are a great diplomat. And I think that really summed up the most important role that a landscape architect can play in those complex projects.
Yeah, that's true. That is a great compliment.
So I wanted to touch more based on design in terms of materials and furniture design, because seeing after going through your projects, it's really clear that the interaction and circulation of people within the landscape is very important, whether it's the walkways, playground structures, or seating. So I know we spoke about it a little bit about the process of digital custom fabrication design. So what does it look like from beginning to end when it's just a conceptual design to the final product?
So I think I'll give you an example of those digitally generated design and fabrication at our LaGuardia airport project. So you probably remember seeing those very organically laid out planter benches with the metal seatings. It's very difficult to produce something like that manually, because all those angles and arcs, shapes and lengths look different. But if you build those in computers, in 3D digital models, it's a lot easier to produce. So what we did was we produced those 3D models in computer, and then we created those in a limited number of modules. So there are a certain number of modules that we kind of put together, mix and match. And what looks like a fully organic and free flowing is actually a combination of a limited number of modules put together. So that was a key to kind of control the complexity of the shapes and fabrication. And then what we did was we sent those digital model in limited number of modules straight to the fabricator. And then they used our computer files directly in 3D milling machines to carve out the mold to create these precast module pieces. And then after that, all they did was basically putting together these computer-generated modules on the site to create those very organic-looking benches and shapes. So that was a very interesting process. I think a good example of how landscape architects utilize these digital technology in our everyday practice.
Yeah, I would just add to that it's another sort of example, going back to the earlier question of the many hats thing, because it's landscape architects sort of dipping into industrial design and understanding, you know, the requirements of the human body to make furniture, and human scale, and understanding human dimensions and requirements for people to use and move through a space is another big thing that you become versed in as a landscape architect. And the different sizes of people, right? Like if you have little people and big people, and how to design for that and make sure that people, let's say, who have mobility devices can move through your space. And so you start to sort of internalize an understanding of human scale and how people physically move through space or use space, and that feeds into the sort of industrial design aspect. You understand how high a seat should be, or if there should be a tilt angle to the bench, which is sort of industrial design. But it's just another hat that landscape architects can wear.
Great. And then, so how do you incorporate the focus of involving social and environmental responsibility throughout your projects? Because you mentioned before how you had to be mindful of sea level risings, and as well as weather conditions and maintenance. So how does that all come together within your project?
Well, Adrian, you want to start with the kind of environmental issues first, because you
Sure.
deal a lot with it.
Yeah, so it's like, as Taewok said, it's a very important and hot topic in landscape architecture. It has been for some time: sea level rise and climate change, and how that affects our spaces, because it, not only will it, but it is currently affecting our spaces. So in parks, we have many things that we deal with and go through to sort of ground test our site and figure out what are the environmental factors that are there. And there's a lot of different agencies, since it's, a city and then often state and federal even level controls that we have to deal with. We really go through a lot of examination of what's there and looking at if there's endangered wildlife in that area. We have to learn about what animals and things plants could live in that area that could be potentially impacted by what we're doing. So that the impact, I think that's the right word, the impact of what we do is always very measured, and the impact that humans are having on the planet is something that we're having to absorb into that process. So looking at even, on down to the more just physical, technical, what height we're setting things at. How much is the water going to rise over a certain time? That elevation that we're establishing and the grades that we're establishing on the ground things will change, and that's another big part of what landscape architects do, is that I think goes back to another question as well about the difference between architecture and landscape, is that time is a huge factor in what we do. And, long time scales, 20, 30, 50, 100 years is all something that we have to consider. And like you saw in Taewok's Kingston project, he's looking at 2080. And that's a real consideration because that stuff will be there that long.
So that's great, Adrian. Environmental responsibility is fully ingrained into the practice of landscape architecture these days. That's really important. We're reaching an hour here, so I'd like to conclude with kind of social aspect of the landscape architecture practice, because I think it all comes down to the people and their life. So a lot of our work focuses on the improvements of public spaces in economically or socially distressed neighborhoods. Great parks and open spaces allow people to go someplace nice and feel good about it, and even though their current circumstances may not be as ideal. And that's a start to rebuild the community together, and landscape architecture helps them doing that. But so how do we approach something like that? The most important aspect here when you approach these communities, at least to me, you have to put yourself in their shoes. You're not there as an expert to give help to these people. You're there to do it together with the people. You have to become part of that community. As long as you remember that, you're doing it together with them, as part of them, you can have a successful project together with those people. And I think that's always the most important lesson that I talk to myself whenever I approach these communities. I'm not there to help these people. I'm there to do this together with these people. And I think that's the most important lesson as a landscape architect, working with these communities.
To wrap up our 8 questions, I wanted to kind of touch base on something that we actually did in class. We're all seniors here. We're all in the same class. So we entered in the Evola skyscraper competition, which is our kind of task was to design a building that it solved an issue, and which was a really great experience. It was funded by the PTA, which is why people watching should be great if you could donate, because the PTA allows us to have all these fantastic experiences, and we can kind of relate to landscape architects, because in this project, we had to also focus on the environment around us and just the space that we were using, the site, So to kind of connect this, one of the main issues that was brought up in the Evola competition is also environmental responsibility, our impact on the land. And I wanted to ask you, when do you think green architecture will become the norm? And do you think that year is soon enough? Or do you think that we're kind of, we're taking too long to get to an environmentally responsible landscape design?
Well, I think the green architecture, in many ways, is already a norm. Maybe we don't realize, most people don't realize that when they're looking at a building. They may not look that green. Maybe it's covered with the glasses or glazings. But you cannot really design any major building without thinking about sustainability. So a lot of time it's actually given what looks like typical building as a lot of kind of technologies and considerations that are environmentally conscious and sensitive already in there. Having said that, the practice of landscape architecture in particular is by default, it's green. So I think being a green architecture or green landscape architecture, without a doubt, is becoming the foundation of landscape architecture practice these days. And that's why we also talk a lot about how landscape architecture can contribute to the kind of stormwaters in the city, or dealing with the climate changes and resiliency and the sea level rises. These are all part of the larger kind of discourse of green architecture or green landscape architecture these days. And I believe it or not, they're already here.
Yeah, that is really like a testament to how well you guys do your job, because many people, me included, like maybe can look at a building and not or outdoor space and not tell that it's green architecture 100%. You know, when you think of green architecture, you think of maybe just like trees everywhere. It's all just foliage, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. So it's really great how you can kind of disguise green architecture in something else that you wouldn't suspect it to be.
There's a great comment that just came in that actually really speaks to something that Taewook and I were saying when we were discussing this presentation. The comment was, it feels like the best green architecture or best landscape architecture is invisible to the public. And I think that's absolutely right. That a lot of, and back to what Taewook was saying about people, don't know what landscape architecture is. I think it's really because it's so familiar, because it really is all around you. You're moving through it constantly, and you don't realize that there was a hand in that because it's just familiar to you. It's what you recognize as your natural environment, and a lot of times that natural environment is made to feel natural by us.
So now would be the section that we take questions from the audience, but I want to ask Miguel, how are we doing on time? And
I have to say, first of all, thank you, everyone. This has been going great. We have still a couple of viewers. There have been a few questions. I don't know if you have time, Taewook and Adrian, to take a few more. We see some folks had some really quick ones I can pull up. They were someone asked, is AutoCAD still the standard? Have we moved on from AutoCAD? AutoCAD still has that hold, huh?
Yes, they do.
So AutoCAD is still, I would say, at least in landscape architecture, that's the industry standard. Architects, on the other hand, a lot of them moved on to a program called Revit,
right,
which is part of the BIM software, the fully integrated building technology. But landscape architecture is still a lot looser, and there are more unknowns than a building. So it's difficult to practically apply Revit in every practice. So AutoCAD is still the norm. There are a number of alternative programs like, what are the programs, Adrian? Help me out.
There's Vectorworks.
Vectorworks, yeah.
Other CAD offshoots, I think Autodesk's offshoots.
Right. That incorporates drafting with more kind of a design and presentation type of functions. Right. But I would say still the baseline is still AutoCAD. But as you could see in our presentations, landscape architects also utilize a lot of graphic design tools, 3D modeling tools that mostly a lot more used by architects in the past. So in my own office, we use combination of programs like SketchUp, which is a very simple and easy to use 3D modeling tool.
And free.
But for more complex shapes and objects, we combine that with Rhino modeling. And we oftentimes bring objects back and forth between these different platforms. And then we bring that to digital softwares like Photoshop to make them actually look a lot more sophisticated. So you actually have to use a lot of different graphic tools, 3D modeling tools, desktop editing tools to complete your project.
And I'd imagine that there's still a lot of natural hand-drawn elements probably that still come in that as well. If I can just quickly pivot on this and let the students talk, now that we just finished talking about AutoCAD, do you want to let the world know your experiences with AutoCAD in our wonderful high school? Anyone?
Yeah, I'll go. It's interesting. It's at first it seems very tedious, and it's a lot of numbers. You have to memorize a lot of the commands. And I think all my fellow students here can agree the difficulty of the certification exam we took, which was really something. And
is that senior year?
This year, yeah, we had to take
right.
Our certification license for AutoCAD. And just, if anyone doesn't know, just respect to anyone who has a certification in any software, okay? Like, don't take that for granted, and, just really give them the respect they need, because just the user license, just the certified user, which is is really difficult. So if anyone has a professional certification, huge respect for all the work and memorization that you need to get to that level of knowledge.
Well, I guess I was just saying this in that, when I was 16, 17, I was, the most I was getting certified in is in playing asteroids. So the fact that we have these very smart, intelligent students who are getting certified in AutoCAD is something that's pretty amazing. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I don't know, Adrian, Taiwook, if you have anything left to say to close out, please feel free.
Well, I'm absolutely amazed how prepared you are as a high school student in the field of architecture, because I did not really expected that. Like that AutoCAD certification, that was a great example. I'm pretty sure you know more about AutoCAD than I do. I didn't learn AutoCAD in school. Like I graduated grad school, got my master's degree in landscape architecture, and I had to learn AutoCAD in the office when I first started there.
So did I.
So I think it's really great that you guys are already mastered the basics of AutoCAD, ready to go to the practice and in the offices. And I can think about a lot more kind of fun and creative things you can do with those the basic skill sets you already have under your belt. So I commend you for those efforts and the school who prepared you for this profession. And I sincerely consider, well, I hope you guys consider the profession of landscape architecture. It's a good alternative to being an architect, I have to tell.
And just to close out, I think it is, what you were saying, how usually people have to learn AutoCAD in the office, but we definitely get such a great head start. And we're also allowed to download these programs for free. And we have them for free in school, these programs that are thousands of dollars a year. And additionally, we get Revit, the other software you were talking about. Even though landscape architects don't use it, it's still great if you're going into just the field of architecture. Another great program that we're funded for. So your donations are really going towards a worthy cause, because we could definitely use all the head start. The head start that we get is invaluable, because then we are kind of experienced before we go to college.
Oh, that's great. I don't want to. I want to just make sure I pull up the banner for you, the Taiwook, since you so graciously came on as a panelist. Adrian, I guess for you, it's just simply walk through the city.
Yeah, you know who we are.
and this has been amazing, and we're going to close out now. We're almost 20 minutes over, but folks are still commenting on this. So this was really good, and I'm gonna cut the cord for the broadcast, but you folks can please stay. You don't have to leave. Folks who've been waiting, you can pop to the next live event that has been going on now for about 20 minutes. I hope you folks make sure to do that. And I want to also thank again for the students. So on behalf of all of us here at the PTA, we'll say bye-bye.
Thank you for having us.
So Miguel, I have to do my marketing thing as a private practice.
Oh yes, go ahead.
Please visit us, www.supermeshstudio.com. Visit us on the Instagram and Facebook.
It's right there.
Search Supermesh Studio, and you will see a lot of up-to-date information. But I have to say, it has been a blast being in this panel. Thank you so much.
Great talk. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for coming, everybody.
So here we are. We're going to do a quick little, again, just a little slideshow and discuss why we're doing what we're doing. So I'll get it started. And
it's been such an amazing weekend. The professionals that we've met through Fanfare have been extraordinary. They gave their time, and they made it possible to interact with our amazing students. This is a fundraiser, though. And so we really want to make sure that people who have enjoyed this content all weekend are really going through and making a donation to help our students. Our students are the best of the best. They are from every part of New York City, from the Bronx to Staten Island to Brooklyn, Queens, and they come to school in the heart of Manhattan. and they need our help. They need our help to get art supplies. That's a big, need that you don't think about. Everyone is not working digitally, and if they are working digitally, they need the next Wacom tablet, or they need the next application, and that's what the PTA funding can give to them. Oh, there's John. Hi, John.
Hello.
Hey, John.
Sorry about that.
That's all
it's
right.
okay.
I'm so excited you were having a great time with the cosplayers.
Oh, they were so much fun. We could have talked for another 2 hours. It would have been great.
And what was great too was one of those cosplayers was an alumni, and
Yes.
she was talking about how much the school meant to her and her ambitions. She is now a working illustrator working with Nickelodeon on a project, I think, also working
Netflix.
Netflix. Thank you.
Yep.
And so that's the kind of student, these ambitious students who want to work in the creative fields. This is a great slide showing some items and what you can provide if you can donate today. A studio easel is something that any artist who works on canvas can use.
The illustration folks,
That is expensive, and we would love to be able to provide that. And so could you make a donation today of $125?
We have our guests here are going to be talking about comics, and there's like India ink, this special, the pens, there are all these little accoutrements that they all need in order to get the job done. So,
and you don't buy it once. You buy the easel once, but ink, paint, paper, you go through it. If you're in school and you have to be constantly creating, you're going through it, and so it's a constant need. And we want to be there for our students, the PTA.
You had a great story. I don't want you to.
Oh, yes. Well, I met with an illustrator, or it was an aspiring cartoonist, but he's in 9th grade. He's amazing. He was showing me an ink drawing, and it was this elaborate ink drawing with all this cross-hatching and everything on it. And he said, I couldn't finish it the way I wanted it to because I ran out of ink in this ink pen, which was like a special ink pen. And I just thought, wow, if that isn't a metaphor for what we're doing, let's keep that ink flowing. Let's let him realize the beautiful creation he was making, and let him be, the next cartooning star. And you can do it.
Yeah. As we were saying, even $1 helps. So anything helps. John, this is here. We rack this up. It's time for that radio voice.
Yeah, here we go, guys. If you can, please donate to fanfarenyc.com, or you can go and donate through a text message, because we're super savvy like that. You can text FFNYC to 44-321. Give us all the money, everything you got in your wallet. Go through your kids' piggy banks. They don't need it yet. When they go to the the High School of Art and Design, then they can save up. But for now, give us what you got.
Yes. Go ahead.
I think there was one more slide that we were going to just talk about merchandise, because John had a T-shirt on that was very special the last few days. I think you had to wash it now. I understand.
That's funny. I actually did. I was like, I can't do
it. It was like the smellometer. There was you couldn't do it. But
2 days I had it.
But we know people are such fans of Fanfare, and we have some merchandise with our mascot on it, which was created by one of our students, Lang Mansunu. And I just want to make sure that everyone who wants to could buy it. It's on our website, fanfarenyc.com, and go there, buy whatever. They're great. I have a T-shirt. I'm excited. My daughter has a sweatshirt.
There's the mascot up in the top right.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
So the all this merchandise is available through tomorrow, but then it's not available. So please do go and get yours today.
There's a gate You gotta
Yeah.
get there before the gate closes. And
Exactly.
then we do want. It's still, if you go and you donate, certain amounts get you some of these merchandise too. Am I not right? I'm sorry.
No,
if
you're
I'm-
right. You're
Yes.
right. I think it is, if you donate $125, we will give you one of these awesome tote bags.
Look at that.
We also have little limited edition button packs. If you donate $50, we will give you a limited edition button pack. We don't have this pictured because it's not for sale. That's a special gift just for our friends who donate more than $50.
And if you donate $1,000, Joanne, myself, and Miguel will come to your house.
Oh, I thought you were going to throw in that dog.
Yeah.
and the dog.
And the dog.
We're just giving stuff away.
Right.
Time, bodies.
We'll do it. I'll get on the call and talk to you. Talk you through that, writing that $1,000 check or making that donation. But
One
more
but
zero.
Thank you.
One more
That's
zero.
right. Exactly.
good.
Right.
Exactly. Thanks.